That's good. We're on track. I'm going to do a quick intro slide, and I'm just going to do this one and get off the plate for a second here. So one of the things that we have at VMware is we have a service called VMware Cloud PKS, which is actually a SaaS-based service. Allows you to effectively build and deploy clusters on Amazon, on EC2, and eventually on-prem, right, in other locations. So any other, any sort of compute locations that allow you to do it. It's completely Kubernetes conformant. It's a fully managed service. So it has a full policy layer, and it has a whole bunch of features around it, which I won't cover here, but I am using that as a baseline for this, just to give you an idea. Ideally, anything I cover here can be obviously run on EKS, can be run on wherever you want, okay? So that's just a little quick introduction slide on that. How many of you are familiar with Istio? Okay, so I can probably skip this one, but for some of those who aren't, right, what is it, right? Simply put, it's a service mesh, right? It allows you and provides you with a certain set of capabilities with respect to actually managing your cluster and your cluster deployments, right? And multi-cluster deployments, and enabling you to effectively have services talk to each other, but brings in a set of capabilities, right? That goes through like load balancing, goes through policy layers, automatic management of metrics and logs, etc., right? And the architecture, I think some of you are obviously probably familiar with this, with standard Istio Architecture from the Istio website. Several different key components, and I'm going to talk to this in a minute, right? Specifically, right? Some of the key components here, right? Obviously, there's Pilot, which does a discovery service, and the access control mechanisms from Mixer, right? And one of the more important features out of all of the components in the architecture, which I'll talk about today, is really around Envoy, right? And what is Envoy? Envoy is a proxy or a load balancer. It does a whole bunch of capabilities around managing inbound and outbound based traffic, right, in your cluster, okay? And I'm going to talk a little about that and how that gets implemented here. So, let's take a look at a typical application that we've got. And I'm going to be using this application as my example, right, throughout the talk. It's a standard LAMP-based application that we've containerized, put on Kubernetes, and we've put MySQL in there, which you may or may not put. You probably use RDS or some other stateful kind of location, right, in general, right? But it's got an API server, a web-based server, and a MySQL component also in it. Now, what we've done here is we've obviously installed Envoy into each one of these pods in each one of these locations. You do automatic or manual injection, right, depending on what you need. And then we've turned on Prometheus and all of that you get standard with Istio. And I'll walk through a couple things here. I'm going to walk through a Helm-based install of Istio. We're going to talk about a couple of different components that you have to watch out for, right, in doing this sort of a deployment. Now, one important thing to note is that you can use multiple different ways to do it. You can do manual, but I've just chosen Helm because it's a very easy way to actually manage that. One of the key important requirements, I think, that you got to think about, obviously, when you go and deploy anything with Istio is you have to make sure that the ports that you put inside of your YAMLs on each one of those services that I talked about are properly named, right? So the labeling has to be correct so that you have proper communication between the services and that Istio actually recognizes what that actual traffic pattern is supposed to be, where it's supposed to talk to. So as an example, right, if I wanted to call it a Django component, right, I'll call it, or in this one is my API server. I give it the name, it's, HTTP, but I give it a dash, right? And I know that an Istio will pick up HTTP, right? But it uses the last piece as sort of a label, right? It's my FC API or my fit cycle application, but it's the API piece of it. And we're using TCP, etc., right? So this naming convention, right, is vitally important. Now, I think the list is actually growing, right? There's a handful in here, but it satisfies most requirements as it is today. Without this, you're really going to kind of fall over, right? If you don't do this correctly from the get-go, right? This is best practice. The next thing that you want to think about in your application, right, and if you think about my application, is really ordering. So how many of you really think about ordering when it comes to Kubernetes? How many of you actually try to order? How many of you don't? Some of you. You kind of depends on what you build, you can or can't, right? Because if you don't, Kubernetes is going to restart those services and those deployments until it needs it, right? So it's kind of like, yeah, whatever, right? But in some cases, you have to be really cognizant of that order. And when it comes to Istio, this gets particularly interesting, right? So it does matter. In my instance, there's 3 baseline services, and I can actually, and I've worked this either way, right? I've kind of jumbled the service around in any place, so without Istio, this thing comes up, no problems whatsoever. And as soon as I install Istio, it kind of goes haywire, right? And there's several reasons for this, right? One of them is obviously that my API servers and web servers are looking for the SQL component to come up, right? But because of the way you build your application, right, this will not come up unless you've actually built your Docker images correctly, right, with the proper entry file, proper entry scripts, right? Otherwise, you're going to get failures. And so let's think about what this means. So if I don't care about the order, right, or even if I do care about the order, right, here's what happens in a deployment with Istio, right? And I've got a simple Django-based server and a pod that I'm running, right? And I've got a statsd sidecar. I've injected Envoy into my pod, right? And I bring it up. But when I look at the log files from Django, it can't connect, right? So here's what happens in general, and what you guys got to think about is Envoy is coming up, and it takes a lot longer to come up than, let's say, a Django or a MySQL or something else. And that's like, you're talking like nanoseconds or whatever it is, right? But that differential is important, because what happens with, let's say, your application components is that they run to completion, okay? They will basically go and say, exit, I'm done, sorry, it's not working. Why? Because Envoy comes up in Istio and basically blocks all communications until it is up and ready to go, and then turns it on. And then your other processes that are up inside the pod are saying, well, I'm done, we're done. We're not having any communication. So in this case, Django needs to go talk to SQL. It can't find it because it's blocked until Envoy comes up. So, and it finishes, okay? And there's no restart here on this one, because Istio has been loaded. So it thinks that it's all communications are done on the bring up, and it dies. And this is a race condition that you'll see, right, in Envoy. Now this is regardless of the order, right? Ordering is important. So how do I kind of fix this, right? Well, one of the things that you're going to have to do is, and what I do is, in the entry point script, in your Docker image, you're going to have to put a wait script in, okay? And this is important. Right? So what I did in, let's say, the container that I built for Django was I put in a simple wait script with the username and password of my location of my service, right? Which you've got them in through environment variables, right? That are loaded in the config files. And this will sit there and continue to wait and until Envoy is ready to go. Then it continues forward, and if you can see the rest of my entry point script, it goes in, does a migration, right, for the database, connects up, and completes. And this I've added in on both like the SQL components, right, on the Flask API server, on my other components of my 3-tier app, so to speak, right? And you got to think about this because we run into this significantly with Envoy in a lot of different places, right? So that's another important kind of aspects of best practice, right? Something that's not as evident, right? How many of you kind of run into this race condition? A couple of them, yeah. So it's a few. Sorry, what's that? You can do a whole bunch of things, right? But generally, what are you going to do? You're going to try to have the pod with everything that you need inside of that pod anyway, right? So there's different variants of doing this. You will have deploy, yeah. So this is one of the things that you got to have to worry about, right? And this is one way of solving it. And so once you have that, you've got your ports labeled, right, which is the first component, right? And you've properly built your images now, right, to properly go get deployed, right? Now you can come in and effectively use Helm to go do a deployment, right? And Helm's pretty easy, right? No real issues with kind of doing this, right? Follow the instructions, right, and go through it. How many use Helm right now? Most of you, I assume. Maybe not all of you. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Helm, right? And Helm is great because it uses standard, basically stable charts, right, or images. Think of Ansible or think of anything out there from an automation perspective. Somebody's pre-built a set of charts that has a set of variables inside of it that you can go and vary. And all you have to do is effectively run a simple command of helm install with some variants of the values that are used as variables, and it percolates through the entire chart to bring up that application, right? And this makes actually installation of, like, say, Istio very simple. If you don't use this, honestly, it can kind of get hairy, right? So I've gone down that path. You've got to use Tiller, right? And Tiller is a component that goes into the cluster and enables you to actually manage the different versions and the different releases inside. And that's what we're using today, right, to do the installation. So first thing, obviously, and one thing you have to realize from, I say, best practices here, also in installing Istio, is you have to be cognizant of the port ranges, right? In addition to kind of label them correct for the application, now you have to be cognizant of what port ranges are allowed or not allowed. So different services, right, are potentially restrictive, right? So EKS, probably open, right, depending on what it is. Depends if you have something on-prem, you may get restricted, right? The service that we use, right, which is VMware Cloud PKS, or now used to be called VKE, right? Because it's a managed service, we restrict the port range from 3400 to 304049. So what do I have to do? I have to go inside of the values file itself and go and make those specific modifications to the different modify the port types so that I can allow communication on those ports, right? And then the installation will pick up those specific ports. Otherwise, you could have an error, an issue in bringing it up, right? So that's kind of like the third thing you need to look out for in installing Istio on Kubernetes, right? Is looking at the ports. But once you have that, right, and make sure it fits, and you've modified your values file, the other thing you can do is now turn on very different services in here, right? Today I'm going to turn on Service Graph as an example, right? And that'll bring that up automatically, right? And allow me to effectively take a look at what I have running inside of my application, okay? And that's a simple change in the values file. So if you go into the values file, all you have to do is to go in and turn true on. Now the great thing about using a Helm chart, right, is that it has all the components that you potentially need, from Prometheus to you name it. It's inside of that values file on the Helm chart. All you have to do is turn it on, right? And then everything will get baked in on that install automatically for you. So it makes life fairly simple and easy. And then run a Helm install command. This is sort of what you're going to see, right? At this point, right, when you take a look at what's installed in Istio, right? And it does a couple of things, right? Obviously, it brings up, right, a ingress and egress gateway for you, right? Brings up, and you've got all the standard architecture components, right? But I've got Prometheus and Service Graph that I also bring up in my instantiation of it, right? Because I want to see some of the stats also. And here's, what it finally looks like, right? Now, once I have this up and running, so to speak, you're not done. Okay, so the next trick and the next big issue around the installation really comes around, how do I effectively get access to my services now, right? What Istio has effectively done is it's gone in and added a bunch of components. If you go back to one of these, it's added an ingress and egress gateway, right? That gateway is your entry point into your application now, right? And you're going to have to go through this to actually get access to that location. And I'll see if I can log in and show you what that looks like, right? So you may have other ingress controllers running elsewhere. It's going to bypass those or not use those, right? It'll use the one it brings up and attaches itself to your application through that location. And we've injected Envoy in there, right? Sometimes I do a manual inject for certain purposes, but you can do that. And one of the things that you have to kind of make sure that you're cognizant of on the installation, right, of the, so let me do this. Once you've got that ingress rules, you have to come in now and actually do a couple of other things to get access. In order to use it, you're going to add two more components, right? first thing you're going to do is add what we call, you're going to define a gateway, right, that adds to your deployment. And here I've just created something called a fit cycle gateway. Fit cycle is the name of my application, okay? The gateway is actually the entry point, and then that gateway needs a set of rules that it's going to use to divert the traffic based on the URLs and or other things to get to the services that are underneath that are exposed. This is where it gets really tricky, right, with Istio. One of the issues is that there's no steadfast rules of writing these rules, okay? This is the messiest part of installing Istio, right, and getting this to work. Now, if you have an application that's running internally where everything runs within that cluster and you don't need any external access, you're going to be okay. But in this instantiation, I wanted to allow people to access the website, get access to the API. Also, I wanted to take a look at, let's say, my service graph and Prometheus components. I had to add these ingress rules properly inside of what we call a virtual service. So this is another component that gets created and it attaches itself, and the gateway uses this virtual service. Really, it's a set of ingress rules. And if you think of the rules and how they're utilized, they're basically, I'm going to match to the most specific pieces all the way down to the end where it just goes to a slash prefix at the end and say, if it doesn't hit any of these, go to this at the end. Getting this is not simple. So I'll give you an example. If you look at the match rules that I've got right now, you can look at this and you can see the / graph, right? And that's actually the URL that you would use to get access to service graph, the standard service graph that comes out of Istio itself, right? And even though you think that that's the URL, that's not sufficient. It goes in and obviously does a lot of communications and it picks up other URLs behind it, right, to kind of refresh the HTML pages. So you've got to understand what those other URLs are going to be that are coming back and forth from your services, and you have to add all that. It takes a little bit of trial and practice, or you may already know what gets exposed, but you really have to understand what gets exposed from that component. Now here I've got my, on my first set of rules, I've got service graph that gets exposed. Secondly, I've got a mobile server that I've exposed. Then I expose my API set, which is over here. And then finally, the website itself. Okay? So let's just take a look at what this looks like, right, on the screen, and then I'll come back and show it to you running, right? Okay, so here's a cluster that I have running right now. And you can see that it's been deployed. You can see what I've got deployed. Now in my default namespace, I've put in all of my application components, right, that are here. I've also got Wavefront Proxy, which you may or may not have heard about in some of the other talks that we've got. All the Istio components are installed in the Istio system namespace, right? And then I use Tiller, right, that gets installed. And then we actually have another namespace that we use for management. It's called the VKE system. Think of it as an alternate to a Cube system itself, right? Where we put in some of the components that are important for us managing the actual cluster itself from a scale up and scale down perspective. So in order for me to get access to my service, one of the things I'm going to need is the URL, okay? How do I find that, right? So let's take a look at the services that are running. We can see here there's this Istio ingress gateway, and it's got a load balancer that's attached to it, right? And in this instantiation, what is done, because I'm running on Amazon, it actually brings up an ELB, okay? And gets assigned, right? And a lot of ports get opened, but I need the URL. It was as simple as, at this point, I'm going to take the name of my service. I'll just do a quick describe, get the URL, and we'll go there. There we go. And you can see I've got an ingress URL that I can use, right? Let's bring this up and go here. Okay, that's my application. Okay, does it work? Sure. I don't know. I'll do a name here. Whatever, right? And that goes, right? Now that's installed, right? I can actually go and take a look at something and come in here. And let me go to API / okay, and there it is on the bottom. Okay, I just added that guy in. So now I want to see my service graph. How would I do that, right? So I actually have it running. I'm not going to retype that entire thing in, right? But basically, you can see here, right? There's my URL, right? But here's my service graph now. That's running. And this is actually now in Istio, gives me the entire soup to nuts traffic flow of what's happening and what's coming in to my application, right? Because I've turned that on. And I can take a look at traffic stats. Like one of them is a mobile server. I have a little traffic generator in the background that's running. And that pulls the stats and gets that from Prometheus and Compose, and a service graph displays this for you. Okay? That's it. That's my talk for today. Questions? Okay, thank you.